All right. So while we wait for Eric to join us here with his video and his video and mic, just want to welcome you guys to our webinar today. As you guys know, this is going to be focused primarily on conversations around business growth. And this is part of a three-part series that we put together after, hey, Eric, I knew you were listening the whole time. I figured I would get started. So this is part of a three-part series that we decided to do in response to actually, it was an ed session that I'd done actually at your place in Dallas, Eric, from the Job Trek Connect. You guys put on a phenomenal show. I spoke on scaling my own remodeling business up, and we got a lot of questions afterwards around a couple of different topics that we decided to just go deeper in. We figured a webinar Q&A style would be the best avenue to kind of go in a little deeper and explain a little bit more about what we've done and bringing in some experts. So this is the third part, focused again on business development, process engineering. I'd like to talk about sales because I know, Eric, that's a lot of your background too. If you guys missed the previous two webinars, we do have them on YouTube. I will send a follow-up after this webinar to everybody who registered. So I will include links for those other webinars, including this one today. It is going to be recorded so that you can always reference back to it if you want. But before we go too much further, I just want to introduce our special guest today. Is more than a special guest. He's, I'll call you a friend now, Eric, and kind of a savant in the space. So Eric, do you want to just introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about your experience? And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, AJ.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my background is I've essentially sold my first company in 2015. It was after that I was actually helping out my landscaper outdoor living lady who was really just kind of awesome at her trade, but struggling to build a successful business. I was just starting to get a little bored hanging out, not knowing what to do with myself after that first company, but she had built really very talented team of people, but when I went over to her office to start spending time getting to know how she was running her business, I found that it was like in total chaos behind the scenes. I wasn't getting invoiced because I thought she was really appreciating and valuing my my help and everything, but it turns out it was just like she had no idea who was getting invoiced and who wasn't. And so that's when I spent kind of my first sort of chunk of time learning a lot about the space and how contracting businesses are run, and I helped her to implement some software there. Won't name names now, but I saw firsthand how beneficial getting systems and processes set up for her business was to really help her get organized and have a better handle on all of her processes. And it was through that that first experience that kind of led to my next one, where a buddy of mine was running a construction company. They were, I think, 4 or 5 years in at the point, but really they were struggling to hit break through this glass ceiling. I mean, they were doing about 5 million in revenue, had call it 10 employees at the time, but just like it was a total crapshoot on how they were going to perform on any one job. And so the owner had asked me to come over, said, "Hey man, can you help me figure out how to scale this thing? Like, we're really struggling to grow it and take it to the next level." And so, again, figured, sure, I'm just hanging out anyways, might as well come over and, take a look at the business. Figured I could just help them, get it streamlined. And, it was like deja vu all over again. When I saw the papers and then the chaos, like just everything felt like it was in disarray, just like papers walking in the door and, going into binders and people, typing it up into spreadsheets and copying it over here. Like, I was like, man, you guys just need some software too.
I think you're poking at some pain points out of everybody who's joined so far.
Yeah. That's where I was like, man, like, again, we need some systems, we need some software to help, streamline this. And so that's when, again, I went back to the drawing board, I looked at everything out there, all the construction management software I could find, made this big spreadsheet looking at all the features, pros, cons, the price, and I struggled though to make a recommendation for these guys. Like, I felt like a lot of the software out there was either, kind of very antiquated, it looked like it was going to be hard to customize, or it was going to require a full-time person, or super expensive. And so ultimately that's what, led me to build what is now JobTread. The owner came to me, he was like, "Well, look, man, you're a software guy. Can't you just implement something?" And I was like, "Well, hold on. I'm not trying to like create another one-off for you guys. I'm not trying to come and take on this full-time job." And they kept pushing me though. And so, I saw a huge opportunity with the construction industry, thought it could be a great opportunity for me to learn and to be able to build this out of a needs basis. And so, I told him, I got 3 conditions. 1, to take over as CEO. 2, everything I build is my intellectual property. And 3, I'll give you 1 year of my time. We will focus in, every day I will show up, we will build, this thing, we will get this ship back on track. And, that was in 2018 when I took over that construction company. Basically started at, kind of trying to understand where all the bottlenecks were, where all the challenges that we were having, which, I think we're going to talk a lot, about that today. But, essentially, started with estimating, then moved to the operations, and then kind of the final kind of back office closeout. Long story short, we grew that company from 5 to 8 million in sales that year. We increased their gross profit by 43%. And so it was at the end of that 1 year when, I ended up starting JobTread in 2019, and we built for a few years, and we started selling it in 2021. Got it to a couple hundred. 2022 got it to around 1,000. Last year we got over 2,000. Our goal this year is 4,000. We're almost sitting at 3,000 already. So it's very quickly exponentially grown on us.
So obviously that the experience in the construction industry when you're developing software for the construction industry, how crucial is that, right? And obviously growing, there's a lot of similarities between growing a business in software side as well as, with the construction side. That's something that I've learned. It's kind of weird that I would have never put myself in a comparison with like your background, like having a construction company moving into software, but that's ultimately what I've done as well. A little different. I kind of grew up in the industry, just and I guess I'll move my slide over to me, right? So most people on this webinar know me, or most people that find this, I imagine, kind of know a little bit about me and my background. But ultimately, I started Cornerstone Remodeling, goodness, 13 years ago, and we've grown it. We quickly scaled it to that $1.5–2 million range. We camped out there for a few years, and we decided to grow. What were we going to, do, past that? And it's very difficult to get past that next bubble, whatever that bubble is. If it's that 1.5 to 2.5 threshold for some of you guys on this call, or if it's that 4.5 to 6, or maybe it's that 8 to 10. Getting past that next bubble usually requires a lot of work and a lot of energy. But I will say that first hurdle takes a lot of effort, because there's a lot of things that your business does not have that it needs. Takes an incredible amount of investment, but we did that. We scaled it up to an $8 million company. My biggest accomplishment, I think, with Cornerstone is that my time commitment there is almost zero. I have maybe right now it's maybe 3 or 4 hours a week. I say 5 to 8 because I have little flare-ups here and there, but ultimately I'm involved with manager meetings, quarterly check-ins, and it's been amazing. It's been a dream. It's something I didn't anticipate, because ultimately what I did with my free time is I started a software company as well called Render, which is in a direct response to kind of what we felt during 2020 through COVID, and gives us the ability to streamline the entire sales process, and even gives us an opportunity to do a lot of that remotely. So I can tell you more about that if you guys have follow-up questions. I think we'll probably touch on it through this because it was such a huge part of us catapulting our sales. We have one sales guy at Cornerstone that was maxed out at like $4 million in sales. That felt like that was a really good threshold for one guy. He's now doing $8 million in sales. We still have not hired any more salespeople. It's pretty incredible what you can do when you can, remove some of those bottlenecks and really focus on efficiencies. And we're going to talk about a lot of that today. And so as a guide for our conversation, I just kind of put together this, slide of some topics that we'll start touching on. But ultimately, when I get asked the question, I want to grow my company, what do I do first? And that is a loaded question. I'm sure, Eric, you've asked yourself this question a million times. Every time you want to grow, it's like, okay, where do I start? And, I've spoken on this topic a handful of times. But ultimately, let's talk about setting goals. I mean, I can talk on this topic for a good, 3 or 4 hours, but ultimately what I, decided that I needed to do first, that here's your first takeaway for the day, is you have to know your numbers. This is true for any business owner. You have to know your numbers. You have to know where you stand. I think at this point, I've memorized every single one of my chart of accounts in QuickBooks. I can tell you exactly where it is on my P&L, whether you need to look higher or lower. Do you have, Eric, like in your experience, like establishing goals, do you have any like tips of like where to start, where to even
Yeah. I mean,
your
I
feet on the
think
ground?
first and foremost, I mean, the question is, what kind of business are you trying to build here? I mean, are you wanting to create a lifestyle business that is something that, you and your family and whoever else kind of you're going to build a very, successful business that cash flows, you get paid good, money, you can spend, have a nice work-life balance, things like that, or are you trying to build a business that, you ultimately want to turn and, sell one day? I think those are two very kind of different, strategies in terms of kind of growth, how fast you want to grow, how many people, you want to add. But ultimately, like, I think the most important thing that any business owner can do is build a budget for the year, come up with a set of plans, again, to the best of your ability, just project, what is your revenue going to be every single month, to get to that kind of that, whatever you want your target revenue to be at the end of the year, you can back into it, or you can come up with kind of some growth metric, again, and then also focusing on, what's your gross profit need to be in order to be able to cover all of your overhead expense. And then at the end of the day, have that, kind of healthy net income that you want at the bottom line. And so, I think going through the exercise of building out an annual budget is something that I highly encourage people to do, because, again, whether you're right or you're wrong, it doesn't really matter. That essentially is the framework for tracking how are you progressing, throughout the year. Are you hitting those goals, or where are you missing it? What's happening? This really can, I think, be that foundation for, setting your business up for growth. But if you don't have that budget in place, like, it's very hard to just come up with these goals, that are really kind of rooted in, the needs of the business,
I agree.
so, I think an annual budget, as well as, again, just, having some sort of a business plan and a playbook, that you're going to operate this business from, and again, you might not have everything filled in or know all the answers, but it gives you a framework where you can continually add to, refine, improve. That's going to essentially help you, as you're continuing to build out the business, think about how do I need to shift from it just being, me as a solo owner operator, to now I'm looking at building out, maybe, someone on my sales team, or maybe I need someone on the
Yeah.
operations side or the back office. Like, that'll be a good framework for you to have in place.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the budget, because that actually wasn't even in my notes to talk about. But that's, when you do set out to obviously grow, you pick a goal, you pick a target, whatever that is. Like you mentioned, that it could be a number for some people, it can be a lifestyle choice, but ultimately it's going to come down to what can I achieve with the company that I've built so far, and what do I have to build foundationally to get to that next level. When we set a target, like I said, knowing your numbers is critical here, because there's a lot of pinch points that you're going to have to like navigate through when you understand the capacities, the outputs of all of the employees within your company. And a lot of that comes from, like I said, just knowing your numbers. You said, what gross profit do you need to make sure that you have all your overhead expenses paid for? If you have a disorganized P&L, chart of accounts through QuickBooks or whatever your accounting software is, you're going to be fighting a lot of headwinds to understand why things didn't work when they should have. So having that organized chart of accounts and understanding, a quick tip on budgets. By the way, I forgot to mention, if you guys have questions like live, like, hey, can you pause for a minute and explain that more? Feel free to drop a question in the chat, the Q&A box. Eric and I are happy to monitor questions that come up in real time and kind of answer those. So it's a little perk. But on the budget, one of the tips that I always had was I would always pull historical numbers out of QuickBooks. I'd pull a report. I do it monthly, so I'll do a whole 12-month forecast for the next year based on kind of target numbers, what things that I've experienced historically. I have a lot of tips on how we've built these budgets out. Well, I'll usually build them in an Excel and basically build in things that some are formula based. I can't anticipate what my material costs are going to be in June, but I can historically say that our material costs are roughly 26% of our revenue month over month over month over month. And I can use that to kind of like project out. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is when you pick a goal, if I say I want to grow from 2 million to 4.5 million, what you want to do is get up to a pace, a monthly pace of 4.5 million, meaning your goal is not to go from 2 million to $4.5 million in like one 12-month span, right? What you want to do is you want to see how quickly can I scale up to a pace that puts me on like a pace for doing $4.5 million. So you're looking at that monthly revenue amount and etching up closer to that amount every single month. So it might be that you reach that $4.5 million pace by November of that year. So then the following year, you can look at that and say, we're going to do $4.5 million next year. But honestly, when you grow past those glass ceilings, your employees feel it the most, right? I mentioned here 5 T's of growth. I actually do have just a little thing. This came up in my one session that I did at Fast Remodeler last year. Said 5 T's of planning growth. You need a team. There's always like these hiking, up a mountain metaphors that people use. I used it too. It's kind of cliche at this point, but you need a team, you need a target, where are you going, figuring out what that company is going to look like. You need a trail, obviously planning on how you're going to get there. You're going to need training. So who can you ask for advice? I think these webinars are great, but surrounding yourself in a round table, getting an advisor. Peers are great to kind of like say, hey, I've got this plan. What do you guys think? And they can rip it apart. You can ignore them. You can take their advice, whatever. And you need tools. And I think there's a little typo there. You need tools. You need tools. And part of the tools that you need, we'll talk about a little bit, but Eric, obviously you saw this with your last company when it came to, seeing like, I need JobTread. I need the theoretical at the point, JobTread. I need something to manage all of these things all in one place so that I'm not fighting myself getting the information I need. Whether it's a budget, whether it's tracking your performance on your financials, when you're estimating projects, how am I actually really doing? Am I tracking for this budget? How do I even know? And obviously scheduling, task saturation comes into play when you're starting to become busier for yourself and your team. A lot of those things, you need the appropriate tools to be able to mitigate all of those risks to,
Sure.
Getting to that next stage.
Yeah, man, I think as you, again, as you kind of look at your plan for the year, and again, if you don't have a bunch of historical data, then you might just need to look at, okay, if I want to go from, I think you said 2 to 4, you just kind of look at those small incremental month-over-month growths, and then that will help you back into, okay, well, if I want to get, X in revenue this month, well, how many leads do I need to bring into the funnel, and based on my close ratio, like how many of those is going to ultimately lead to, hitting that revenue goal. That's going to then in turn also help you understand your hiring needs. How many people do I need to be able to hit these goals? And as your goals get larger and larger, you're going to realize that like you at your small scale can't keep hitting those goals. You're going to need to start building out that team. And so, I think ultimately that, again, it kind of helps you to understand, what is our growth strategy and what do we need to have in place, to be able to hit those goals. And then when if you miss something, well, now you can kind of look back on that previous month and say, well, where did it go wrong? What did we, what didn't we do, or what do we need to do next month to make sure that we can make up for that difference? I think having that, that in place is going to help you to really understand, where your bottlenecks are. Because as you continue to grow your business, like you need to become, a well-oiled machine that's extremely efficient. And so when you start to find those bottlenecks, that's when you can go and say, okay, well, is this a training, challenge? Do I need more people? Or is there some software, some technology that I can bring in that would just make my existing resources much more efficient, much more productive so that we don't have to keep throwing bodies at problems? Hopefully you can kind of sort of figure out what is the right mix of tools, people, and processes to ensure that you're hitting those goals.
Right. We do have a question from Darren. It's, maybe you can weigh in on this, Eric. I have a few in mind, but what are the 3 to 6 main numbers that you should specifically look at and watch each month? I guess when we're talking about monitoring specific KPIs, which we'll talk about, I guess, later on as well. But since we have this question, I would say, you kind of hit the nail on the head when you're anticipating growth. There's a lot of things that you have to kind of build into that. You can pick a number and put it in a spreadsheet, but ultimately work backwards from there and figure out, like I said, how much marketing, how many leads am I going to need based on my closing percentages, based on my average job size, all of those pieces are part of one big formula, right? So the numbers that we watch specifically at Cornerstone on a more of a monthly basis, or whether it's biweekly or monthly, I would say our lead flow is extremely important, things that we can react to very quickly. Lead flow is is number one. I would say our sales, like our sales forecast or completed sales in a month, we want to hit specific targets. So we're monitoring performance of our sales team. And we're monitoring our overall profit and loss. We do WIP reporting once a month so that we're monitoring exactly kind of how we are going on these jobs. Again, these things are giving us intel of things that we can pivot quickly on. If there is a mistake or if there's there's a fire burning somewhere, we can identify that quickly and kind of get in and fix that. So if your eyes are turned away from your marketing or away from your sales performance or away from your production performance, and we're talking high level kind of stats on those. There's obviously underlying stats when you talk about performance of your sales team. Why were sales dipping last month? They could have been the closing percentage dips, or they just had less leads to work with, or their closing period, their sales cycle is running too long. We want to shorten that up. So there's a lot of things that come into play there, but marketing, lead funnel, your sales performance overall, and I would say your production performance financially, to make sure that you don't have to make quick pivots here and there. I don't know if you have any other suggestions. You've been spending a lot of time creating some great reporting tools in JobTread, so you probably have a lot to say here.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, kind of any business, right? At the end of the day, like you've got to make sure that you're turning a profit and that you're bringing in more money than you're spending. So if you think about kind of starting at kind of the bottom there, I mean, it's the most important is your net income. Are we covering all of our overhead? I mean, payroll is obviously something that will be a very big expense for many companies. Especially when you bring on employees, you're paying yourself. So kind of looking at that that net income there. Obviously then once we've got our overhead flushed out, I mean, it's that gross profit. Are we achieving our target profit margins on our jobs? If not, then we need to address, why, and then that's going to kind of help back us into, okay, are we hitting our top line revenue numbers that we need to do? And if we're not getting that gross profit, then we need to start really breaking down our COGS. I mean, are we overrunning on labor costs? Are we overrunning on, material costs? Like something is causing us to not hit that target profit margin. And so like we start to kind of dig into that, but when we look at our top line revenue, I mean, are we getting enough, deals in the door? Are we closing it? And if not, then, we need to go look at, what does our funnel look like? Are we feeding the top of the funnel? If we're using advertising, are we spending enough money to get enough leads in the door? And then what does our closing ratio look like? I mean, how, so if you're going out on site, I would definitely be very aware of how many, on-site, demos or presentations, are you doing with the homeowner? I mean, are you getting out there enough? Are you getting in front of them enough? Or if you don't go out on site, maybe you just kind of do the, again, the one call close, doing the selling, over the phone and virtually, then, again, how many meetings are you having? Are you meeting with the decision makers? Like, are those, fruitful? Are those leading to, conversions into new customers? I think, again, kind of just thinking through the entire, flow from the very top of the funnel all the way down to, the net income at the end of the day. Like, you got to really kind of make sure that you're tracking and understanding each of the different components that's going to go into those so that you're building a healthy and profitable business.
Because there's a lot of levers there that you can pull based on what you're experiencing. We experienced a slowdown in 2023, and ultimately it wasn't a fault of our production department. It actually wasn't even a fault of our sales department. It was really wasn't a fault of our marketing department, but we kind of had our eyes turned for a little too long. There were a lot of levers that we could pull on marketing, but we were also kind of pulling up the nose of the plane. We had all these issues on marketing that we could fix relatively quickly, but obviously as marketing kind of shrunk, a lot of things shrunk on the the actual pipeline, the sales pipeline. So we were going to experience, kind of production issues later on. So we started pulling on other levers, not just marketing, but we were pulling on levers on increasing job size, increasing closing percentage so that we can close more deals. We shrunk our sales cycle so we can close more deals faster. And all of those things kind of helped alleviate what could have been a pretty dramatic dip in our revenue forecast, because there were just more levers that we could pull on because we knew where to go looking for more juice in that lemon to squeeze. We've got a question from Mark here on adding more specificity regarding production performance. Happy to weigh in on this. Eric, you mentioned that first thing that came out of your mouth was, your net revenue. What are you actually making at the end of the day? And a lot of that does come from the production team. It's not like it's all on their shoulders, but ultimately there's a lot of things you can predict about your expenses every month when it comes to your overhead. And you can, more or less predict your revenue to make sure that it's offsetting a lot of those fixed costs. But when you're looking at your production team, when we're monitoring their performance, a lot of it has to do with WIP reporting, making sure that our budgets are coming in from subcontractors and vendors, material, to projected timelines on the job. So all of those specific things will affect that gross profit number. If that job takes 10 weeks when it was supposed to take 8, I've got 2 extra weeks there that I wasn't able to start another job, and that's going to push that job back. It's going to stretch this one out even further. I have more labor tied into that one project. My project managers are becoming less efficient, so their indirect expenses to those jobs are going to be increasing. So ultimately that gross profit number begins to shrink. And that's the one thing that we want to stay ahead of, because that definitely has a huge impact to that net profit number at the bottom. Because if I'm not performing well on a job, I quickly need to identify, is this a production issue or is this a sales issue? But obviously the production team is going to tell me, be the leading indicator on that and tracking all their, specific
Yeah.
performance.
So let me share a story. So, again, when I first took over this construction business, like I saw that we were really struggling to hit our target profit margins. And so like I started digging in more, and I realized that like some of the crews, we're doing a better job of hitting kind of what we expected to be, how long, number of days, or coming in on budget. And so there were a lot of them though that it was just wildly all over the map. And so, one of the things that I did in order to really understand, the production performance was I started shadowing our project managers, trying to understand like, how are they, managing these jobs. And that's when I found that, whatever the sales team and the estimating, but building out our system, it was just like total crap. They were just like back of the envelope, kind of making up numbers. Like there was no scope of work clearly defined. So that handoff to the production team was very murky. We couldn't even leverage change orders because, nobody really knew what was actually sold and what was agreed to, and so that became a challenge. But, when I saw that, with the production team, I realized that like one of our biggest issues was that we were selling the jobs at a fixed price, but then we were operating and executing on those with a variable cost. We were paying our crews time and material, so they were getting paid by the day, to go out and deliver on those projects. And what I started doing is kind of like undercover boss. I started following around the different crews, and I'll never forget this one time. So I show up at a job site. It was like 8 a.m. And essentially like, I had expected that the crew was going to be there around 7, turns out, they had to go to Home Depot, do the shopping, gather the materials, they don't show up till closer to 9. So, I'll own that, again, like I learned that I should have had, the materials already on the job site, or I should have at least had them pre-ordered at Home Depot. Like I do not need my 3-person crew going and spending time, shopping. They're there to be constructing. And so, it was kind of first lesson. But then, around 11 o'clock, the guys realized that they need some additional materials. And so instead of calling the office, calling the project manager, or just sending one guy, all 3 of them got back in the truck, go back to Home Depot. And now they're spending another, 45 minutes, doing whatever they're doing there. And then they come back to the job site. So sure enough, now it's like around, lunchtime, and this whole time the customer's sitting there
Strike a
watching
chord
this.
with everybody who's listening right now. It's like the Home Depot trips.
Yeah. So, and then like, I kid you not, a third time, AJ, these guys around 2:30, decide they need to go back to Home Depot. All 3 of them get back in the truck. And so like, customers calling me like, Eric, what the hell's going on? Like, I'm like, sir, I'm very sorry. I apologize. We're going to get to the bottom of it. This isn't going to, drag out your project. We're going to get it done. But like, at the end of the day, like this is when I realized that we weren't aligned with how we were selling our jobs at a fixed price and then running them at a variable cost. And so at this point, this is when we transitioned, to basically using bid request and giving our subcontractors, our trade partners, guaranteed payments, so that, again, it was now up to them to tell us, how long is it going to take? Okay, it's going to take you 10 days, and it's going to cost, 5,000, 10,000, whatever your number is, just give me that. I'll plug that into the budget, and then I'll turn around, add my margin and sell it. And then at the end of it, once we win the job, I'm going to, one click, convert that to a work order. Now, again, you told me it was going to take you 5 days. Great. If you get it done in 3, awesome. You're still getting paid that same amount.
Yeah.
But if it takes you 7, now that's on you. Like you basically have, you misbid the job. Whatever came up. I mean, barring, any unforeseen circumstances or like change orders that need to come into play. Like, again, that is now their problem. And so the funny thing, when we made this transition, not only were we able to now more accurately, budget our jobs and sell them, but like the quality of the work went up, the speed of the work went up. Like the guys realized they were no longer going to be compensated, to have to go back 2 and 3 times. They were incentivized now to get the job done correctly the first time. And that was how they were going to be able to get more work.
So
And so
yeah,
that
there
was one
are.
of the,
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
yeah, no, I mean, that was one of the big levers that I feel like really helped us to hone in and understand how do we make sure that we're delivering, that target, gross profit that we set out to sell. Is that we had to lock in that rate, and then we had to adequately compensate, all of our production guys to make sure that, we were aligned in how we were going to operate this job.
So there's a big process there, right? Because ultimately, I think a lot of remodelers experience that same issue where you are doing like fixed price contracts, but you have that variable cost, especially if you have a lot of in-house carpenters, people that utilize subcontractors, that PM and subcontractor model can fight that a little bit more just based on what you said is getting costs or getting budgets from bid proposals from our subcontractors, right? And holding them accountable to that.
Yeah.
But
I think though, AJ, to your point though, when you are using, internal employees, like the key there is that you're looking at and you're understanding their production rates. So if you're selling, linear feet of something or square feet or whatever it may be, like you need to know, how long does it take to be able to deliver on that unit. So like, again, you may not know immediately, day one when you start working with someone, but you've got to use your historical data to understand if you estimated something, you thought it was going to take 10 hours, to do 1,000 linear feet of whatever, then you need to, at the end of the job, look back and say, okay, actually it looks like it took us about 12 hours. So you need to come up with that production rate, that unitized production rate that you can then plug into that next job so that you can make sure that you're, accurately estimating it. And
so let's
it's
talk
something you're
about,
gonna,
yeah, so let's talk about that process. I mean, obviously having eyes on that stuff is critical, right? So
yeah,
when we talk about building out an organization, when you're trying to grow, we're talking a lot about efficiencies and making sure, there's a lot of predictability in numbers, making the math work. But ultimately, to make the math work, there's people involved. There are some, instances where employees may be underperforming when you need to bring their production up, or it could be, an issue with the estimation department, right? Your sales guys, missing certain things. Understanding the budget versus actuals on specific jobs. Maybe you don't make as much money on bathrooms as you thought, right? So there's the discovery process, but there's also, obviously a staffing process there. We realized at Cornerstone when we started to grow, we needed those eyes on all of those pieces. Fortunately, your last company had you in a position where you can play undercover boss, but a lot of times we don't have, as business owners, that extra time in our day to
sure.
shadow anybody in our field. So middle management. It's like got such a negative connotation, but ultimately that's what we realized at Cornerstone, that we were missing a layer that was underneath of me and perhaps my two main, my right and left hand, to actually manage a lot of. We would come up with this process, right? We're going to do this with our subcontractors. We're going to pay attention to these numbers. We're going to pull these reports, and we're going to do this and that and that. But who's doing that? Who's spearheading that? And we realized, okay, we need a layer of people that can hold a lot of the employees down here accountable to these new processes and make sure that we're reporting and we're getting the intel that we need. So staffing that obviously comes at a cost. So identifying that in our budget, whether it's middle management in our field or middle management in our office, a lot of those things, that safety net that I would have to make sure that these processes were implemented and perfected over time, which we should talk about that now too. But that middle management layer, staffing for accountability, that's one thing that I've always said. Like, you got to make sure that there's people that understand where you're going,
Yeah.
and can hold that process accountable, right? Because you can have all the processes you want and all the data points that you want to collect, but unless there's someone actually doing it and tweaking and pivoting and adjusting as you go,
Yeah.
it's almost pointless, right?
I mean, I think my approach is like, and just kind of my philosophy is like, I always try to keep every one of my organizations that I built as flat as possible. I think that what's the number one most important thing you can do is hire great people. You need to build a team of awesome people. And, when you're small, obviously you're going to be wearing a lot of hats. I think one of the most important things that kind of the biggest mistake I see happening, with entrepreneurs kind of as their business grows is that, they go from focusing a very large portion of their time on sales to now that they're selling things, now they sort of divert their attention and they're focusing on everything other than sales. They take their eye off the ball with sales. And so at the end of the day, it's very important that you have somebody who's always going to be focused on and dedicated to making sure that you continue to fill the pipeline, that you're continuing to bring in deals, continuing to do that with your customers. Now, on the operation side, I mean, again, hiring a really, really great project manager, even if you're having to spend more money, it's so important that you have great people, because the longer you can have, rock stars in those roles, the less kind of, hopefully the less sort of oversight and overhead expense, these kind of managers, if you will. I'm a big believer in that, people need to really understand the role. And so even if someone sort of rises up and surfaces as your production manager, I would still, for as long as you possibly can, have them still managing jobs themselves. That's how they're going to really earn the respect of everyone else on the team, is when they're modeling that correct behavior and they're putting up the results that they want other people to do the same. And so, to the
And if they're
extent that
not,
like you
and,
can hire
and if
great people, that's going to kind of, I think, buy you a little bit more runway before you have to bring in that middle, management layer, which, obviously at your scale, AJ, it makes total sense. But I think as people are kind of moving into that direction, I see a lot of people that struggle, when is the right time to hire somebody? And again, I think that goes back to your financial model. At what point in the model can you afford to cover that incremental overhead? And again, it might make total sense, because if you bring in, some additional overhead there, additional, people, well, that might in turn unlock, additional jobs that you can sell, or additional jobs that you can run, concurrently, so that you're able to, bring in more to cover those costs. But, I think it is a very fine balance of understanding, the making sure that the people that you put in place are the right people, focused on the right things and doing those right roles, so that you can get that output that you expect.
right. I think you said it perfectly. So I think we can leave that one there. If you guys have follow questions, I had a personal question here, which I can probably answer pretty quickly. It's AJ, how did you replace yourself? Um, so I think here, I mean, you kind of said it. As a owner starting out, you wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
Um, I've always said you need to find out what you can hire other people to do better than yourself. I'm not going to be the best designer. I'm not going to be the best estimator. I'm not going to be the best project manager, right? So I'm going to surround myself with incredible talent. As a coach of a team, you're never credited with scoring the winning basket, right? But you are credited with assembling the best team with the best play calling to win that biggest game. So for me, I had to hire. First thing I had to do was get myself out of the field. You don't want yourself swinging hammers as a business owner.
Yeah.
You need to look at yourself there. So I replaced myself in the field. I then hired a designer, so I replaced myself in the design position. I then replaced myself in the field again, because as you step out of the field swinging hammers, typically as an owner, you're still doing a lot of production management, right? You're still organizing things in the field. So I replaced myself in the field again. And then probably the most critical step I did, even before I think most would give up marketing at this point, but before I gave up marketing, I actually gave up my sales seat at my business, which was the most difficult. And I've had it said to me a million times, the last thing you want to give up as an owner of your company is the sales seat. You are the best salesperson. In most cases, the owner of the company is the best salesperson for the business, right? But I gave up my sales seat, and then I replaced myself in marketing. And then you would think I'm done at this point, but I then had to give up my seat as operational director. I had to hire a general manager at this point to oversee the day-to-day operations. So that's ultimately the steps that I took to kind of replace myself. But every step of the way was just replacing me, in one role in my company with someone who can do it better, right? So I'll move on from there. Let's talk about process engineering. It's 11:40. We have about 20 minutes left in this conversation. There's probably 6 hours of material in this 60-minute session, but let's talk about process engineering. So you're a big process guy. Obviously, JobTread is a big process-minded software, right?
Sure.
I talk about simplify and streamline. You kind of mentioned this as well, where you find those bottlenecks in a process and you work to massage those out. So as a business owner, we've got a lot of them on this call today. What are some of the steps that a business owner can take? I guess first in understanding the difference between a system and a process, right? I think we hear those two terms together all the time. But to start looking at pieces of the company, where do you direct your eyes first, and how do you identify what really needs to be, a primary
Sure.
focus to simplify and streamline?
I mean, from, again, when I took over this construction business, I mean, I just sort of trying to figure out where to start. Well, I naturally went to the beginning of the estimating, looking at, and again, this is where I took time to shadow these guys and understand, how are they coming up with their numbers? How are they estimating? How are they calculating their price? I mean, and it was in that exercise of trying to really understand and talk to the guys and ask them, how are you doing this? Like, that's where I found that, like, almost everybody was using markup to calculate the price instead of margin.
Oh
The owner
gosh.
was the only guy who understood that a 30%, profit margin, actually was a 43% markup. But the problem was these other estimators, they were just marking up their cost 30%, which is only going to get you a 23% profit margin. So, before you go and try to, solve all the world's problems, I think you got to understand what are the challenges that you're facing. And you do that, by putting that hat on and by sitting in that seat for a few days, either doing it yourself, or if you have someone else doing it, again, talking to them and saying, what do you feel like you're spending your time doing that you wish you weren't having to do? And if you didn't have to do that, you'd be far more productive. Same thing with, with the project managers. Like, I sat there and I tried to understand, what were their biggest challenges. And I realized that, again, that, having a detailed scope of work when they took over the job, or, having a schedule to see who was scheduled out on what jobs and who was available, being able to have all the photos and files uploaded, every single day, that gave them visibility into those jobs. When I looked at the back office, I mean, like, maybe I should have started the back office, because I uncovered that we had over $800,000 of AR sitting there, and like my mind almost exploded when I realized that, like, we were literally, had earned almost $1 million, but we weren't focused on collecting it, and so I'm like, how in the world does this happen? And that's when, again, you got to dig in and say, well, help me understand this. And I see, well, the field guy, told the back office lady to go send the invoice. Well, she did it, but she was so overwhelmed because she was doing AR, AP, things were chaotic, that she just assumed that the field guy was going to follow up. Well, the field
Oh,
guy's got no visibility into the QuickBooks. He has no idea if we got paid or not. And so they both sat there, we're assuming that the other one was going to do it. And at the end of the day, like, we weren't collecting our money. And to make things worse, the owners would literally take that AR and go to the bank, they'd collateralize it, and they would borrow $200,000 line of credit after line of credit, like, to fuel
oh, and
cash
you're
flow. Like,
throwing away money at that point. Oh my
yeah,
God.
this is a death sentence. Like, you can't do that, but like, it takes really understanding what are the processes, what is happening here. And then from there, when you can find those bottlenecks, now you can design a much more efficient process, which, again, it may involve training. It may involve, a system or some software, or again, you might have to find a different person who's more suited to that, but you got to identify, like, what is the pain in order to come up with a more efficient and effective process,
A nice exercise, a nice exercise that we did was, we thought that we needed another designer to increase our output of our, sales team. So when we started to dig deeper into why, our designers really weren't, putting out as much work as we felt like they should be, we're, instead of replacing or, adding another designer to the team, we really got into the root of what they were doing all day. And then we realized, instead of hiring another designer, we actually ended up coming up with a brand new position for our business, which was a production coordinator, which handled all their ordering. Our designers, what they were best at, only they could do, was walk the customer through making these selections, putting these 3D images together. But they were stuck 20 hours a week ordering, procuring all these selections and making sure that they were coming in on time, doing double checks and things like that. And things were slipping, and we had all these issues. with the production teams not getting things on time or things being ordered wrong or documented wrong. So we came up with, so specific processes around how things get ordered and how things get documented, which added time to the designer's plate. So we looked at all this time they were spending designing, selecting and ordering these selections. So let's find somebody else that can do just that piece. Hired a production coordinator, and it doubled the output of all three of my designers because now they're no longer ordering. So one person allowed me to double the output of three other people.
Yeah.
So it's little things like that when you start to figure out, okay, let's put a process together. And once you have a process, then you can identify who's the best person to actually be put in charge of this process. Because you say, you said, you get two people assuming the other one's going to do a specific task. So the opposite of allowing assumptions to happen is providing accountability. I have one person who's in charge of this. And if I know that this went wrong because this process wasn't followed, guess what? I'm only talking to one person at that point. I can say, hey, what happened here, right? So another tip that I'll kind of leave here too, when you're thinking about processes and okay, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? How can we improve this, right? I'm gonna say it unashamed that my team had a nickname for me. I guess I won't say it live, but had to do with flowcharts. I was big into flowcharts. I love flowcharts. They got me a little bourbon glass that said, "We need more whiteboards," because that's what I would like say that all the time. I'm like, I just need one more whiteboard to be able to map this out. When you're mapping out a process, flowcharts are a great way to do this. It will actually show you when you can say, okay, what happens first, and then what happens. Okay, once this happens, then what's the next step? And you can map all these things out, and you end up with a spaghetti mess of things. Usually, when you first start attacking a particular process you want to improve, you end up with a spaghetti map, right? It's like, okay, well, then this happens. Sometimes we kick it over to this person. Sometimes it goes here. Sometimes it does this and that and this. I actually have an example here of where we started when I first said we need to improve our sales process from within our company. I started to map out, okay, how do we move a job from getting a lead to actually signing a contract? And we thought we did the best job at streamlining this particular process, right? But I ended up with this flow chart. I just copied and pasted this. This is an old one. It's a mess. Now, I can follow the arrows and I can say, okay, when a job reaches this phase, a job reaches this phase, and this is the next thing that happens, but this is a mess. We operated with this for a little while until I said, okay, once we simplified this, then we can streamline it, right? So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna simplify this. So we said, how can we make sure that I can follow this and I can hire any sales guy, any designer to work in my company that understands when a job is here, this is the next thing that happens. You're not gonna jump 3 steps ahead and you're not gonna go 2 steps back, right? So this is our new process. So we simplified that. We said, okay, we're just going to move, and it's much cleaner. And again, we're talking flowcharts. We're talking just visual, visual aids for us to figure out, okay, what happens here and here and here. But when you're showing these to your team, you're training your team on these new processes. When you have something simple like this, guess what happens when it's simple and not complex? They follow it much easier. It's easier for them to adopt and understand what is supposed to happen and when. And once you simplify, then you can streamline. So this is what we did to streamline. So we said, okay, now we got this process. It's kind of long. How can we streamline it? And this is going to be my shameless plug for Render here. But we said, how can we get from the lead coming in to design concepts? Because we were spending 3 or 4 weeks just in that, initial consults, going out to the job site, collecting measurements, getting the design agreement, and then finally popping out to do some design concepts. It was 4 weeks. So we got a lot of wasted time there. How can we shrink that? Because we're not getting paid a lot of money to get that far. And so we did. We're leveraging technology. JobTread has a big play here as well. I mean, JobTread's all the way through this, right? All the way from when the lead comes in, all the way to the build contract and past, right? So leveraging technology to streamline things is really important to take into account when you're trying to, not squeeze every dollar, but you're trying to make sure you're not having to hire 10 people to do the job of one person when you can, simplify a process like this, right?
Yeah, I totally agree, man. I think keeping it simple is so important. I see people that just try to over-engineer, their processes, and it becomes this, convoluted, mess. Like, you got to just like focus on the high level. Again, think about it as this is a guide. If you've hired the right people, they're going to know how to accomplish each of those different steps, but give them the path that is going to make sense for everyone.
Creating a specific I spoke about this too, like, if you ever go to Denny's or like some restaurant where they, you have a little kids menu that has a picture with a grid on it where you can basically trace and make your own, you can copy the picture and creating specific boxes for specific things to happen so that the person who didn't do it the first time could easily pull it off again. So making sure that that's a simple process for somebody else to follow allows you to scale your team with less onboarding headaches. So let me ask you a question. Does JobTread or previous companies, did they ever adopt any kind of like EOS type of system or anything similar to that? That's a question that usually comes up a lot.
I'm loosely familiar with them. We've kind of we essentially in all my companies, I mean, we have our own kind of, playbook that we use to manage the business. And so, that's really been kind of the framework that we've implemented, I mean, from my last company, and then to the construction company to here at JobTread, like, we've developed our own internal playbook that we find, works very well for us. And, I mean, I get asked all the time, like, how are you guys, doing so much with so few people? And it's just because we're a well-oiled machine. We've implemented this playbook before, and
That's a
again,
great
it's not,
observation.
it's not, specific to any type of business. I mean, it's, how are we going to operate sales? How do we handle marketing and the lead flow? Like, how do we, again, do the delivery, service delivery? How are we going to support it? Like, making sure that all of the key, fundamentals and key functions of your business have been defined and what those, systems are, what those processes are. Again, this is the basis for training new employees also, is that they can come understand how are you operating this business and from what playbook. And when you have it all documented, that makes it a lot easier, to implement.
Document everything. Document everything.
Yeah.
Job descriptions, processes, meeting agendas. I've always made a reference to ChatGPT in these webinars, but use ChatGPT to help you put these things together.
Oh, yeah.
So nobody has time to write up all these things, right? But ultimately, when you have all these things documented, you can always have something to reference back. Again, it's that accountability piece of making sure that you do have that well-oiled machine, making sure that all the parts and pieces are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, so that you're not fighting yourself. Like, why am I experiencing all this trouble? Well, go back and look at your processes. Did everybody understand their role to play in this? Did they actually understand the expectations that they're there to do these set number of processes within your system, right? Unless you have that documented somewhere, I can tell you right now, like, they probably didn't know that, right?
No.
EOS is something I just bring up because there's a book, that I usually recommend a lot, Traction. It's a great to help you organize, because I wanted to get into kind of like what's the next steps, and certainly I wanted to get into like the wellness factor too. But when you're thinking about next steps for your company, making sure that you're planning things ahead and thinking about all of these things, seeing around corners, understanding what kind of hurdles am I going to experience. Getting into some books. Traction's a great one to help you kind of frame your head around what it's going to look like. What is my 3-year goal or 3-year my flag post? I'm going to plan it at three years, and I'm going to work backwards from there. What are the steps that I have to do in year 1 to make sure that that 3-year goal is possible? Okay, what are my steps within this year to make sure that quarterly I'm getting to my 1-year goal? So working yourself back is a good mechanism.
I mean, I think one of the most important things that I see people not doing is taking the time to have a meeting to analyze your performance. How did we perform on every single job? And again, maybe you do this weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, kind of whatever cadence. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that you're dedicating time to sitting down, with your estimators, with your project managers. Understand, how did we perform? What went wrong? What can we do on the next job to make sure that we don't continue to make the same mistakes over and over and over again?
And just as importantly, what went right? Can we replicate that?
Yeah.
If there's something that went right, like, let's do that again. You might realize that what went wrong was focusing on these things, but what went right was actually, we shouldn't, if you look at it from jobs, you can look at it from sales performance, marketing, campaigns. I mean, everything. You can say, what went right? let's just focus on doing that. It might mean that you give up part of your business, right? We are phenomenal at building decks. We're fast. We can get them done lightning quick, right? But I never made a lot of profit on decks. And honestly, I made extreme margins on selling cabinets for kitchens. So we said, okay, well, we perform so well on kitchens. Let's just replicate that over and over and over again. What do we need to do to actually make that happen, right? So it's like focusing on what went wrong, but also focusing on what went right.
Types of jobs, types of customers, where are you making the most money? Where are you hitting your target profit margins? Go do more of that. Focus on that and quit doing all the things that you're not doing well.
It'll make
you
the
can't
growth
do
a lot
everything.
easier.
You got to focus on being great at a few things, niche down on that and go do more of that.
So I wanted to touch on this because this is close to my heart. Eric, you're a dad, you've got young kids. I think we're cut from the same cloth when we say we want to build a business that, allows us to enjoy our life, kind of with our family and not sacrifice that. So, mental wellness, growing a company takes a toll on a business owner naturally. Like I said, it takes a lot of energy out of us, whether it's actually 9 to 5, right? It's the 8 hour day, at the job, but it's also the mental energy that kind of lingers, right? You're thinking about it. You're like, gotta get ahead of my day, gotta get ahead of my week. Taking vacations is difficult to plan in when you're like, how can I pull this off and even have the time to get away with my family, right? So how do you protect that? Do you have any tips, any tricks on making sure that your own mental health, your own personal well-being, your family well-being is taken care of?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm probably not a great example of a work-life balance. I'm probably the opposite of that. For me, I mean, I try to make sure that every morning I get to say good morning to my kids, see them at breakfast, take my daughter to school, and I try to be there kind of at the end of the day, for dinner, or sometimes I miss dinner, but at least to help put them down to bed. But pretty much, I mean, after that, I'm usually, working from, call it, 8:39 to midnight every night. I mean, there's no, there's no way around that. Being a successful entrepreneur takes an enormous amount of hard work. I mean, the reason that, again, I believe JobTread is one of the fastest growing construction management softwares out there is because of how dedicated our team is, and we work a lot. I think though it's really, how do you not get burned out? Well, it's all about your mindset. I don't actually believe that like I'm working. I believe I'm doing what I'm passionate about. And every day I wake up excited to come in and conquer whatever challenges, whatever big rocks I have for the day. And so I think it's always like, kind of keeping it in perspective that like, you get to choose your own destiny. You get to choose what you focus on and the career that you want to build. And if you're not happy in your role, if you don't wake up every day excited, to go to work and go do, whatever it is that you need to do that day, then you need to make a change. You either need to change your mindset and your expectation, or you need to change your role or your company or whatever it may be. But like, you got to be excited. Like, life is too short to not spend your time loving what you're doing, working with people that you're passionate about, that you care about. You're going to spend more time with your own colleagues than your own family. And so like, it's so important that people understand that and just accept that being an entrepreneur and being a business owner, I mean, it is a lot of work, and how you, kind of wear that and take that, is all up to you. I mean, you can't go home and walk in with this like baggage weighting you down and all those stresses, because again, that's going to then, lead you to start projecting that on to your spouse or to your kids. Like, you got to be able to kind of take that time, separate, cherish those moments that you do get with your family. But, I do think that, there's no 9 to 5, 8 to 5, whatever you want to
I
call it.
know.
Like, it is
It's
a
on.
constant
It's
battle,
on.
and you're working. And
One,
even if you're not at a computer, I mean, it's the mental cycles
the
are still
highlight reel.
occurring.
Yeah, the highlight
So
reel is still playing in your head. I think we've all experienced that. One of the
I would say one thing I would say though, like my wife is very good about trying to make sure that we do plan vacations. And that's when she knows that like I try my best, to have those kind of dedicated, times throughout the year where, I do try to disconnect as best as I can. I'm not, at work on the computer, we're at some activity, some destination where, again, I try to kind of pour in as much of my
Intentional
time and
about
focus to the family,
being, yeah,
and that
being
helps.
present, right? Yeah, and
Yeah.
very intentional about that. A couple tips that I picked up, because we all can sympathize with like that, right? It's always on, it takes a tremendous amount of work, and we're willing to, actually do this, right? We signed up for it. My wife is great. We kind of look at everything as a season. There are busy seasons that we just kind of have to muscle through, and ultimately, but guarding my own mental well-being, my own, health for my family life, comes down to a couple tips, right? To get all of this junk that is in my head, usually when I come home from work, I whiteboard everything that's on my mind, every topic, and it's a bunch of scribbled mess, right? But it allows me basically to download everything that's still on my brain onto something, whether it's a notepad I used to keep a notepad by my bed, and if I would lay there at night thinking like, I got to make sure I answer that email in the morning, I'd write it down. You can do it in your phone, but downloading the mental mess at the end of the day has helped me tremendously be able to focus on my family through, several hours unimpeded without having to think like, I have to keep this going because otherwise I will forget that I have to
Yeah.
do this tomorrow, right? Time boxing is huge for me. If I have a lot of stuff to get done in a week, there's nothing like a race clock, racing the clock. All right. So I will actually set timers. I think it's going to take me an hour to do this. I'm going to set a timer for 45 minutes. So I'll actually schedule things on my calendar for my own personal, like I've got to put this webinar deck together. I'm going to give myself 45 minutes to do this. And it goes on my calendar, webinar deck. 8 a.m. to 8:45 a.m. I'm putting together the webinar deck, right? It's very intentional for me to attack that head on. On my schedule, I'll block out time just to say, hey, I need to do a lot of catch up. I need to do emails, time box, like literally create space in your schedule to accomplish all of these miscellaneous tasks. So just a couple of little tips that I picked up along the way, because it does get grueling, right? It's a lot to manage as
Yeah.
you begin to grow. But I realize we're at time, we're a little after 12. I'll kind of just put this up here. If you guys have your phones, for those who are still joining us, basically these QR codes are just a way to get in touch, learn a little bit more about my company, Eric's company. If you scan those, it'll take you to each one of our websites. Otherwise, you can remember based on who we are, where we're going with this. Um, if you guys have any other ideas about webinars, feel free to reach out. I'm going to send a follow-up email with this recording, as well as the other two that we did. If you want more of this, I am happy to facilitate these conversations. I think Eric is too. You can tell that we're both really passionate about these things. Eric, you got some comments here that you were on fire today. I appreciate you leaning in with your expertise. I want to make sure that I can facilitate these types of conversations in the future. So if it's more about business development, or if it's specifically something we mentioned today, that we can set aside time to kind of focus on those, feel free to reply to that email that you guys are going to get, and let me know, hey, let's have a conversation. Or if anybody on this call is an expert at any of the things that we talk about, obviously Eric and I aren't the only experts in this particular webinar right now. There are some very powerful minded people that are a part of this webinar, and those who will be watching this on YouTube that can weigh in. So I love to have these conversations. I really appreciate you, Eric, and everything that you're doing with JobTread. My remodeling company, Cornerstone, uses JobTread. It's like our number one thing that we've been focused on. So I appreciate everything you did there to kind of help us achieve those growth milestones. And obviously with Render 2, I'm, you heard it here first. Looking forward to that integration, because I think it's going to be really key for businesses to kind of achieve those streamlined processes to help them grow their sales organization within their business. But Eric, I appreciate the time, man. I really
Yeah,
do.
thanks. Yeah, happy
Yeah.
to hop on anytime, AJ. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. Pay attention to the email you'll get as a follow-up, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.
See ya.